The America's Got Talent stage was bathed in its familiar golden glow as the evening's auditions reached their emotional peak. It was a warm September evening in 2024, and Simon Cowell sat in his usual position at the judges' table, black t-shirt crisp despite the long day of evaluations. The studio buzzed with its typical pre-performance energy, crew members adjusting cameras, audience members settling into their seats with anticipation, and the familiar hum of television production that had become the soundtrack to Simon's life over the past 2 decades. After countless seasons of AGT and decades in the entertainment industry, Simon had developed what he thought was an unshakable professional composure. He had seen child prodigies and tragic backstories, witnessed incredible triumphs and heartbreaking failures. He had comforted crying contestants, celebrated with winners, and delivered harsh truths to those who needed to hear them. In his mind, he had experienced every possible combination of talent, emotion, and human drama that could walk onto his stage. He was about to discover that some moments could still catch him completely off guard and challenge everything he thought he knew about himself. 6-year-old Oliver Martinez stood in the wings, clutching a small red toy car in one hand and a carefully folded piece of paper in the other. He was a small boy with unruly brown hair that stuck up in several directions, despite obvious attempts to comb it down with what appeared to be an entire bottle of hair gel. His clothes were clean but clearly second-hand. A white button-down shirt that was slightly too large, with sleeves that had been rolled up multiple times, and navy blue pants that had been carefully hemmed but still showed wear at the knees and slight fading from too many washes. His shoes were polished but scuffed, the kind of careful maintenance that spoke to limited resources being stretched as far as possible. Most striking were his eyes, a bright green that seemed to hold far too much sadness and wisdom for someone so young. They were the eyes of a child who had learned to read adults carefully, to assess situations quickly, and to protect himself emotionally while still maintaining hope. Oliver had been living in the Los Angeles County foster care system for 3 years, moving between 7 different homes since his mother's death from a drug overdose when he was 3 years old. Some homes had been kind but temporary, others had been merely functional, and a few had been situations he preferred not to remember. His current foster parents, Maria and Carlos Gonzalez, sat in the audience with nervous expressions and hopeful hearts. They had been fostering Oliver for 6 months, longer than any of his previous placements, and had grown genuinely attached to the quiet, thoughtful boy who helped set the table without being asked and always said please and thank you. They were hoping this AGT experience might bring some joy and confidence to a child who had learned to expect disappointment, but somehow maintained an optimistic spirit that amazed everyone who met him. Maria had discovered Oliver's singing voice by accident 3 months earlier, when she heard him humming while doing homework. When she asked him to sing louder, what emerged was a voice so pure and emotionally resonant that it brought tears to her eyes. Carlos, a construction worker who considered himself too tough for sentiment, had cried the first time he heard Oliver perform the song he had written about wanting a family. The song had started as a poem Oliver wrote during a particularly difficult night when he couldn't sleep, wondering if he would ever find a permanent home. Maria had helped him turn the words into a melody, but the emotions and the desperate hope behind every line were entirely Oliver's own. Tonight, standing in the wings of the most famous talent show in America, Oliver carried that song and a question that had been burning in his heart for months. "Ladies and gentlemen," Terry Crews announced with his characteristic enthusiasm, his voice booming across the auditorium, "our next performer is 6-year-old Oliver Martinez from Los Angeles." The audience erupted in applause as Oliver walked onto the stage, his small feet making barely any sound on the polished floor. Simon immediately noticed the child's careful, measured movements, and the way he kept glancing around as if mentally mapping the space and checking for exits, behavior Simon recognized from other children who had experienced instability and learned to always have an escape plan. Oliver's walk to the microphone took longer than usual, not because he was nervous about performing, but because he was processing the magnitude of the moment. This wasn't just an audition for him. This was potentially his chance to reach the person he had been thinking about for months, someone he had watched on television and imagined might understand what it felt like to be alone and looking for connection. "Hello there, Oliver," Simon said, his voice carrying that paternal warmth he had developed over years of working with young performers. There was something about this particular child that immediately caught his attention, a combination of vulnerability and determination that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "You look very smart in that shirt. What are you going to do for us today?" Oliver carefully placed his toy car on the small table beside the microphone stand and adjusted the microphone with surprising competence, suggesting he had practiced this moment many times. He looked directly at Simon with those penetrating green eyes that seemed to see right through the celebrity facade to the man underneath. "Hi, Mr. Cowell," Oliver said, his voice clear and strong despite his obvious nervousness. "I'm going to sing a song, but first I need to tell you something really important, and I need to ask you something even more important." The seriousness in Oliver's voice immediately caught the attention of all four judges. This wasn't the typical excited rambling of a child performer. This was a deliberate, planned communication that suggested Oliver had spent considerable time thinking about exactly what he wanted to say and how he wanted to say it. Heidi Klum leaned forward with interest, her maternal instincts immediately activated by something in Oliver's demeanor. Sofia Vergara smiled encouragingly, while Howie Mandel sensed the emotional weight behind Oliver's words and prepared himself for what might be coming. "Of course, Oliver," Simon replied, settling back in his chair but keeping his attention fully focused on the child. "What would you like to tell us?" Oliver pulled out the carefully folded piece of paper from his pocket and smoothed it with the kind of reverence usually reserved for precious documents. The paper had clearly been folded and unfolded many times, suggesting it contained something Oliver had been carrying with him and thinking about for a long while. "I wrote this song myself," Oliver began, his voice gaining strength as he spoke about something that clearly meant everything to him. "It's about looking for something I've never had but really, really want. Something I see other kids have. Something I watch on TV shows and in movies. Something that makes families complete." He paused, looking around the auditorium as if taking in the faces of everyone who was listening. "But before I sing it, I need you to know that this isn't just any song. This is my heart, and I'm sharing it because I think maybe someone out there needs to hear it." Howie Mandel, sensing the emotional significance of what was happening, spoke gently. "That sounds very special, Oliver. What is it that you're looking for?" Oliver's grip on his paper tightened visibly, and he took a deep breath before answering. "A daddy," he said simply, the word carrying the weight of 3 years of longing. "I've never had a daddy, and I've been in lots of different houses with lots of different people, but nobody ever wanted to keep me forever. I know what mommies and daddies do because I see them at the park and at school pickup, and I watch them on TV. They love their kids no matter what, they protect them, they teach them things, and they never leave." The studio fell silent as the magnitude of Oliver's statement settled over everyone present. This wasn't just a sad backstory. This was a 6-year-old child articulating a fundamental human need with the kind of clarity that comes from deep, painful experience. Simon felt something twist in his chest as he processed what Oliver had just shared. The matter-of-fact way this young child spoke about rejection and abandonment, his clinical understanding of what families looked like from the outside, and the hope that still existed despite repeated disappointments, it was both heartbreaking and remarkable. "Oliver," Simon said carefully, his voice softer than usual, "that's a very honest thing to share with us. Can you tell us a little bit about your song?" Oliver's face brightened slightly, the way children's faces do when they're given permission to talk about something they're passionate about. "It's called Somebody's Little Boy, and it's about how every kid should belong to somebody who loves them no matter what. Maria, that's my foster mom. She helped me write down the words when I was having trouble with the spelling, but all the feelings and ideas are mine." He held up the paper, and Simon could see that it was covered in a child's careful handwriting, with some words crossed out and rewritten, evidence of the thought and care that had gone into crafting each line. "I've been working on this song for 2 months, Oliver continued, and I've been practicing it every day because I wanted it to be perfect when I got the chance to sing it for someone who might understand what it means to be looking for a family." The vulnerability in Oliver's voice was palpable, and Simon found himself leaning forward, completely absorbed in this child's story and impressed by his emotional intelligence and self-awareness. "Would you like to sing your song for us now, Oliver?" Simon asked. Oliver nodded eagerly and carefully unfolded his paper, placing it on the music stand. He took a moment to compose himself, closing his eyes and taking several deep breaths the way Maria had taught him to do when he felt overwhelmed. When he opened his eyes and began to sing, the transformation was immediate and profound. Oliver's voice was pure and clear, carrying an emotional honesty that seemed impossible for someone his age. But more than the technical quality of his singing, it was the raw emotion and genuine hope in every note that captured everyone's heart. "I'm somebody's little boy, but I don't know who. I'm somebody's little boy searching for you. Every house I go to, every bed I sleep in. I wonder if tomorrow you'll finally walk in." The audience was completely silent, absorbed in the raw emotion pouring from this small child. Simon found himself holding his breath, completely captivated by Oliver's performance and the profound sadness behind the hopeful lyrics. I've got toys to share and stories to tell. I know how to be good. I know how to behave well. I can tie my shoes and brush my teeth at night. I just need somebody to kiss me and say everything's all right. As Oliver continued singing, Simon felt his professional detachment beginning to crumble. This wasn't just a performance. This was a 6-year-old child essentially auditioning for a family, using the AGT stage to express his deepest longing for belonging and unconditional love. I watch other kids get picked up from school, see daddies teaching sons to follow the golden rule. I wonder what it feels like to have someone proud of me, someone who thinks I'm special, someone who'll never leave. The lyrics were sophisticated for a 6-year-old, but more importantly, they revealed a level of emotional processing and self-awareness that spoke to Oliver's resilience and intelligence. He had taken his pain and transformed it into something beautiful and meaningful. Maybe you're out there. Maybe you're watching me. Maybe you're the daddy I was meant to be with. Maybe you'll see me and know I'm your little boy. Maybe you'll love me and fill my heart with joy. Oliver's voice cracked slightly on the final notes, and as he finished, he looked directly at Simon with those hopeful green eyes that seemed to be searching for something specific. The applause from the audience was thunderous and lasted for nearly 2 minutes, but Simon wasn't clapping. He was staring at Oliver with an expression of profound emotion, his hands gripping the edge of the judges' table. "That was absolutely beautiful, Oliver," Heidi said, wiping tears from her eyes. "You have such an amazing voice, and the song you wrote shows so much heart and maturity. You should be very proud of yourself." "Thank you, Miss Heidi," Oliver replied politely, but his eyes remained fixed on Simon, as if waiting for something specific. Sofia Vergara spoke next, her voice thick with emotion. "Oliver, you're such a brave little boy to share your feelings like that with all of us. Your song was very moving, and it shows what a special person you are. Any family would be lucky to have you." "Thank you, Miss Sophia," Oliver said, offering her a small smile. But again, his attention returned immediately to Simon. Howie, clearly moved by the performance and struggling to maintain his composure, added his praise. "Oliver, that was one of the most honest and powerful performances I've ever heard on this stage. You didn't just sing a song, you shared your heart with all of us. You should be very proud of your courage and your talent." "Thank you, Mr. Howie," Oliver responded, but his body language suggested he was waiting for something else, something more important than praise from the judges. But Oliver seemed to be building up to something bigger. He took a step closer to the judges' table, still holding his paper, and looked directly at Simon with an intensity that was remarkable for someone so young. "Mr. Cowell," Oliver said, his small voice cutting through the studio noise with surprising clarity and purpose, "my song is really about you." Simon's expression shifted from emotional appreciation to confusion and surprise. "About me, Oliver? What do you mean?" Oliver nodded earnestly, his green eyes never leaving Simon's face. "I've been watching you on TV for a really long time. Maria lets me watch AGT every week because she says it's educational and inspiring, and I see how you help people achieve their dreams. I see how you care about kids who perform, how you give them advice and encouragement, and how you sometimes help them in ways that go beyond just the show." Simon was beginning to feel uneasy, sensing that this conversation was heading somewhere unexpected and potentially overwhelming. "I've watched you cry when kids tell sad stories," Oliver continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke from his heart. "I've seen you help families who need assistance. I've watched you be kind and caring, even when you try to act tough. You seem like you would be a really good daddy to someone who needed one." The studio fell completely silent as the implications of Oliver's words began to settle over everyone present. Simon felt his heart begin to race as he realized where this conversation was heading. "Oliver," Simon said carefully, his voice slightly strained, "what exactly are you trying to say?" Oliver took another step forward, his small hands trembling slightly as he held his paper. When he spoke, his voice was clear and determined, carrying the weight of months of thinking and planning and hoping. "Mr. Cowell, I don't have a daddy, and from what I can see on TV, you don't have a little boy who needs you. I've been thinking about this for a really long time, and I've been hoping that maybe we could help each other." Simon's breathing became shallow as he anticipated what was coming next. "I know you're really successful and famous and probably busy," Oliver continued, "but I also know that families aren't about being perfect or having lots of money. Families are about loving each other and taking care of each other, and choosing to stay together no matter what." Oliver paused, taking a deep breath before asking the question that would change everything. "Mr. Cowell, I don't have a daddy, and maybe you need someone to love who will love you back no matter what. So I want to ask you," he paused, his voice trembling with hope and fear, Will you be my daddy? The question hit the auditorium like a lightning bolt. The audience gasped collectively, many people crying openly at the pure hope and vulnerability in Oliver's request. The other judges sat in stunned silence, clearly processing the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. Camera operators continued filming, but many were visibly emotional themselves. Simon stared at Oliver, this brave little boy who had just asked him the most direct and heartbreaking question of his life. For a moment that felt like an eternity, Simon couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process what had just happened. He looked at Oliver, 6 years old, standing alone on the biggest stage in America, holding a toy car and a piece of paper containing his deepest hopes, having just performed his heart out, and then asked a complete stranger to be his father on national television. The courage and desperation behind the question, the months of planning and hoping that had led to this moment, the pure faith that Simon might say yes, it was overwhelming in ways Simon had never experienced. "Oliver," Simon started to say, then stopped, his voice catching in his throat. Oliver stood perfectly still, his green eyes filled with hope and terror, waiting for an answer that would either fulfill his greatest dream or confirm his worst fears about his own worthiness of love. For 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes, Simon tried to find words that could adequately respond to such a profound and innocent request. The weight of Oliver's question, not just what he was asking, but what it represented about his life experiences, his understanding of family, his desperate need for belonging, was crushing. Simon stood up from his chair, something he rarely did during auditions, and for a moment it seemed like he might walk over to Oliver and embrace him. But instead, he began walking toward the stage exit, his face a mask of overwhelming emotion. "Simon," Heidi called out in confusion, her voice carrying concern and bewilderment. "Where are you going?" Sophia asked, clearly not understanding what was happening. Simon paused at the edge of the stage, his back to the cameras and the audience. His shoulders were shaking visibly, and it was clear he was struggling to maintain any semblance of composure. "I need a moment," Simon said, his voice thick with emotion and barely audible. "I'm sorry, Oliver, I need a moment." Simon walked off the stage, leaving Oliver standing alone at the microphone, still holding his toy car and his paper, confusion and hurt beginning to cloud his hopeful expression. The child who had just poured his heart out and asked for the thing he wanted most in the world was now watching the object of his hopes walk away from him. Oliver's face crumpled slightly, but he didn't cry. Instead, he carefully folded his paper and picked up his toy car, the same way he had learned to pack up his belongings and move on whenever a placement didn't work out. "It's okay," Oliver said into the microphone, his small voice carrying throughout the silent auditorium. "I understand. I know not everyone can be a daddy. Thank you for listening to my song." The audience was crying openly now, heartbroken by Oliver's gracious acceptance of what he perceived as another rejection. Backstage, Simon stood with his back against the wall, tears streaming down his face in a way that hadn't happened since he was Oliver's age. A production assistant approached cautiously, unsure how to handle the situation. "Simon, are you okay? Do you need anything? Should we call someone?" Simon wiped his eyes roughly, not caring that millions of people would see him cry, not caring about his reputation or his image or anything except the 6-year-old boy he had just left standing alone on stage. "That little boy just asked me to be his father on live television," Simon said, his voice breaking completely. "He's 6 years old, he's been in foster care for 3 years, he's never had a stable family, and he just asked me to be his daddy. He planned this whole thing. He wrote a song about wanting a father, and then asked me directly." The production assistant, a young woman named Sarah who had been working in television for only 2 years, had never encountered anything like this situation. "What are you going to do?" she asked gently. Simon ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of complete overwhelm. "I don't know. I can't just adopt a child on live television. But I can't just say no to a 6-year-old who's asking for love. That little boy has more courage than I've ever had, and he's been planning this moment for months. He said he's been watching me, studying me, deciding that I might be the father he's been looking for." The weight of Oliver's planning, the thought and hope that had gone into his question, made Simon's emotional response even more intense. When Simon returned to the stage 20 minutes later, the scene had changed significantly. Oliver was sitting on the edge of the stage with his legs dangling, while the other judges had come down from their table to sit with him. Maria, his foster mother, had been brought from the audience and was sitting beside him, her arm around his small shoulders. Terry Crews had explained to the audience that they were experiencing something unprecedented in AGT history. and everyone remained in their seats, understanding that they were witnessing something far more important than entertainment. "Oliver," Simon said as he approached, his voice gentle but still carrying the strain of his emotional breakdown. "I'm sorry I walked away. That wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't the response you deserved after being so brave and honest with me." Oliver looked up at him with those green eyes, now showing traces of the rejection and disappointment he was all too familiar with. "It's okay, Mr. Cowell. I know you don't want to be my daddy. Nobody ever does. I shouldn't have asked you on TV like that. Maria says I was being inappropriate." The resignation in Oliver's voice, his immediate acceptance of rejection, and his willingness to blame himself for asking for what he needed, broke Simon's heart all over again. Simon knelt down in front of Oliver, bringing himself to the child's eye level. "Oliver, I want you to listen to me very carefully, and I want you to hear every word I'm about to say." Oliver nodded, though his expression remained guarded. "It's not that I don't want to be your daddy," Simon said slowly and clearly. "What you asked me tonight was the most important question anyone has ever asked me in my entire life. Do you understand that?" Oliver's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of hope returning to his eyes. "Being someone's daddy is the most important job in the world," Simon continued. "It means being responsible for another person's happiness, safety, and future. It means loving someone unconditionally, being there for them no matter what, and never ever leaving them." Simon paused, letting his words sink in. "When you asked me that question, I got scared because I want to make sure that if I ever became someone's daddy, I could do the job right. I could love them the way they deserve to be loved, and give them everything they need to be happy and healthy and successful." Oliver was listening intently now, his emotional intelligence allowing him to understand the nuance in Simon's explanation. "What you did tonight took incredible courage," Simon said, his voice growing stronger. "You shared your heart with millions of people. You wrote a beautiful song about your deepest feelings. You asked for what you needed with honesty and bravery. That makes you one of the strongest people I've ever met, and I'm honored that you thought I might be worthy of being your father." Oliver's eyes were bright with tears now, but they were different tears than before. "Oliver, I can't become your daddy tonight on this stage," Simon continued. "There are laws and processes and things that have to happen to make sure children are placed in the best possible homes. But I can promise you something very important." Simon looked directly into Oliver's eyes. "I promise you that we're going to make sure you find the family you deserve, and I promise you that what happened here tonight is going to change your life in ways you can't even imagine yet." Simon turned to address the cameras and audience directly, his voice carrying a conviction and emotion that everyone present could feel. "Ladies and gentlemen, what Oliver has shown us tonight goes far beyond talent or performance. He's shown us the courage to ask for love, the bravery to hope despite repeated disappointment, and the strength to keep believing in the possibility of family even when that belief has been tested over and over again." He looked back at Oliver. "You deserve a family who will love you completely, unconditionally, and forever. You deserve parents who will be there for every scraped knee and every bedtime story, who will celebrate your successes and comfort you during your challenges, who will choose you not just for tonight but for every single day of your life." The audience was giving Oliver a standing ovation, but Simon wasn't finished. "I may not be able to be your daddy, Oliver, but I can be someone who cares deeply about what happens to you. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to work with the best family placement agencies, child welfare advocates, and adoption specialists in the country to make sure you find the home you deserve." Oliver's face was shining with hope now. "Really, Mr. Cowell? You'll really help me find a family?" "Really," Simon confirmed without hesitation. "And Oliver, you're going through to the next round of this competition. But more importantly, you're going to find your forever family. I give you my word." Oliver smiled for the first time since asking his question, a bright, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "Can I hug you, Mr. Cowell?" Oliver asked. Simon opened his arms, and Oliver ran into them, hugging him tightly while the audience continued their applause. In that moment, Simon understood something profound about the responsibility that came with being in a position to help others, and about the courage it took for a child to ask for what he needed most. What happened next exceeded everyone's expectations. Within hours of the episode airing, AGT's offices were flooded with adoption inquiries from families across the country who had been moved by Oliver's performance and his simple, direct request for a father. The show's website crashed twice from the volume of traffic, and social media exploded with messages of support, offers of help, and stories from other children in foster care. Simon, true to his word, personally oversaw Oliver's placement process, working with the best child welfare advocates and family placement specialists money could hire. He established a foundation specifically dedicated to helping children in foster care find permanent families, with Oliver's story serving as the inspiration and driving force. 3 months after his audition, Oliver was adopted by David and Jennifer Walsh, a couple from Portland, Oregon, who had been trying to adopt for years and fell in love with Oliver the moment they saw his AGT performance. David was a pediatric nurse who understood the trauma that children in foster care experienced, and Jennifer was a music teacher who was excited to nurture Oliver's obvious talent. The adoption process was expedited through Simon's connections and resources, but more importantly, it was thorough and careful, ensuring that Oliver was placed with a family who could provide the stability, love, and support he needed. 6 months after his original audition, Oliver returned to AGT for a special segment that would become one of the most watched episodes in the show's history. He ran onto the stage and straight into Simon's arms, no longer the careful, guarded child who had first walked onto the stage, but a confident, happy boy who radiated the security that comes from knowing you belong somewhere. "Oliver," Simon said, lifting him up in a big hug. "Look at you. You look amazing." "I feel amazing," Oliver replied, his smile bright and genuine. "I have a family now. A real family who wants to keep me forever." During the interview that followed, Oliver talked about his new life with the Walsh family, his progress in school, his continued involvement in music, and his adjustment to having parents who were committed to him long-term. "How's life with your new family?" Simon asked during the interview. Oliver beamed with the kind of happiness that comes from having your deepest needs met. "It's everything I dreamed about and more. Dad teaches me how to play soccer and basketball, and he helps me with my math homework even when I get frustrated. Mom reads me stories every night, and she's teaching me how to play the piano so I can accompany myself when I sing." He paused, his expression growing more serious for a moment. "But the best part is that they tell me every day that they love me, and that they're never going to leave me, and they showed me the adoption papers with my new name on them, so I know it's real and legal and forever." Simon was visibly moved by Oliver's transformation and the obvious security he now felt. "What's your new name?" "Oliver David Walsh," Oliver announced proudly, his chest puffing out with pride. "I kept Oliver because that's who I've always been, but now I have Dad's middle name and their last name, so everyone knows I belong to them and they belong to me." Simon smiled, feeling a deep satisfaction at seeing this remarkable child finally receiving the love and stability he deserved. "That's absolutely perfect, Oliver. How do you feel about other kids who might be in foster care like you were?" Oliver looked directly at the camera with the same intensity and purpose he had shown during his original audition. "I want to tell them to never ever stop hoping and believing that their family is out there looking for them too. Sometimes it takes a while, and sometimes you have to be brave and ask for help, but there are people who want to love you just exactly the way you are." He paused, thinking carefully about his words. "And I want to tell them that it's okay to ask for what you need. Sometimes grown-ups need kids to tell them how to help, and sometimes you have to be brave enough to say what you're feeling. My new parents tell me all the time that they're so glad I was brave enough to ask for a family on TV, because that's how they found me." The interview continued with Oliver performing his new song, "I Found My Family," a joyful anthem about belonging and love that brought the entire studio to tears once again. The song was later recorded professionally, and became a fundraising tool for Oliver's foundation, with all proceeds going to support other children in foster care. Simon often reflected on Oliver's impact on his life and world view. "Oliver taught me that sometimes the most important questions come from the smallest people," he would say in later interviews. "His courage to ask for love, even after experiencing rejection, reminded me that we all have a responsibility to respond to that kind of bravery with compassion and action." The story became a landmark moment in adoption advocacy and child welfare awareness. Oliver's simple question, "Will you be my daddy?" sparked national conversations about foster care reform, the importance of finding permanent families for children in the system, and the power of giving children a voice and platform to express their needs. Television networks began featuring more content about adoption and foster care. Celebrities started speaking out about the need for more adoptive families. Government officials cited Oliver's story when proposing legislation to improve the foster care system, but perhaps most importantly, Oliver proved that sometimes the most powerful auditions aren't about talent or performance. They're about having the courage to ask for what you need most, even if it's something as fundamental and profound as a family to call your own. The foundation Simon established in Oliver's honor went on to help thousands of children in foster care connect with permanent families. Oliver himself became a spokesperson for adoption awareness, sharing his story at conferences and events, always emphasizing that every child deserves to belong somewhere and that families come in all different forms. Years later, when Oliver was a teenager, he would look back on that moment on the AGT stage as the night that changed everything. Not because Simon became his father, but because Simon showed him that asking for what you need takes courage, and that courage is always rewarded, even if not in the way you originally expected. "I didn't get the daddy I asked for that night," Oliver would say, "but I got something even better. I got the courage to keep asking until I found the family that was meant to be mine all along."